And good morning, everyone. Thrilled to have you on today and looking forward to sharing some information with you about building a resilient cybersecurity program. So we'll go ahead and get started. Just a quick minute or two on what we, who we are as the North Carolina Military Business Center. So we are state funded and we are part of the community college system, headquartered at Fayetteville Tech. I am actually located at Wake Tech. And since we're the only organization in the United States that is focused on military economic development. So even though we say we're military, that's how we started. We've actually sort of moved into all of federal. So we help all federal contractors in the state, and we are focused on bringing more federal dollars into the state. This is just a map of kind of where we are. This is me right here. And I am, again, I'm at Wake Tech RTP campus, and this is kind of my region at the moment. Although I haven't been doing a lot of business development lately, I've been working on cybersecurity, but as you can see, we're all over the state, and we are a free resource for federal contractors. We also have a free tool for those of you who are federal contractors out there or would like to be a federal contractor. It's called Match Force, and you can sign up to use the free tool, and it will match opportunities coming out of the System for Award Management to your profile. And it's very handy. It's much easier than trying to do searches yourself in SAM. Here is my information. If you would like to contact me, feel free to do that. This is our website, and cybernc.us is the website that I've put together for federal contractors in North Carolina to help them build their cybersecurity programs. So we will just go ahead and get started here. So we live in a time of unprecedented change. I read an article recently, a prominent economist said, we're in the exponential age, and it's very, very difficult to keep up. And to stay ahead of evolving threats and new technologies is more than a full-time job. So in order to be able to keep up, and remain able to respond to all of these threats that are happening, we have to be resilient. We can no longer have a cybersecurity framework in place that simply tries to deter or withstand an attack. We have to be able to, respond to it and recover, and we have to really prepare. The days of a checklist of controls are over. In order to be resilient, it requires some skills that I think a lot of us learned through COVID. We have to know what we're doing. We have to be flexible, and we have to be responsible. This is a team sport. We've got to communicate and work together, and we have to be really, really good at problem solving. So as you work to prepare your cybersecurity program, the first thing you need to do is develop a good tone at the top. That is everything in the compliance world. If you have a leader who understands why you need this program, how important it is, and provides you and your organization with the resources that you need to develop, maintain, and evolve this program, then you're well on your way to success. If you try to just pay it lip service and you look at this as something that you have to do and you don't want to do it, that attitude will permeate your organization. It will be very, very difficult for you to build a really good, resilient cybersecurity program. So preparing, there's a lot of things you have to do to prepare, and this is one slide or two slides, and these are things that take months to do. You have to have good asset inventories. You can't protect the assets you don't know you have, and you don't know where they are, and if they are even protected by government regulations. So you need to look at pretty much every asset you have in your organization You need to know everything you need to know about that asset. And data, don't forget, is an asset. So you have to know where all your data is. Where does it reside? How is it supposed to be protected? So this sounds kind of easy, but it's not. It takes a long time if you haven't been keeping up with your asset inventory to know where everything is. I was on a course last night, and one of the consultants was talking about almost every company he works with, when they find hardware and software that no one even knew they had. And those are vulnerabilities at that point. That puts you at risk if you don't know where they are, especially if it's hooked up to the network. Someone else is going to know they're there. So again, data is the new currency. That's what everyone is after, particularly our adversaries. And we don't want them to have our data. So you've got to know where your data is, and you have to know what kind of data. What type is it? Is it just sensitive? Is it, just for your company? Is it your intellectual property, legal documents, contracts, NDAs, MOUs, things like that? Is it regulated? Is there some regulation out there that maybe you need to look into to see how you're supposed to be protecting this data? Intangible. That is a big one, particularly for large companies, but it really applies to everyone. We've seen the damage that breaches can do and to your brand. And so, that's an intangible, but it has to be protected as well. Your IT software hardware, you need to know where everything is and have a good handle on what it is, all of the details, serial numbers, revisions, all those kind of things. You need to know all of that. And you need to look at it from the perspective of what can be harmed by a cybersecurity incident. Any asset that you have could potentially be harmed, and you need to make sure you know where those assets are and have a good handle on where they are and who owns them in your organization. Risk. While I work on the cybersecurity maturity model certification, and even though that is not a risk framework, you can approach it and as a risk framework. You can do the same with any framework that you're looking at. You need to do a thorough risk analysis so you can determine how you need to implement the controls that are in those frameworks. So you need to look at that and make sure that you're including supply chain risks in there. If you had a chance to review the executive order that came out in May about cybersecurity, supply chain risk was right in there. And so that is something we all have to be very careful about, is knowing what those supply chain risks are so that we can mitigate them. And this is a little cartoon I put in here because once you do a risk analysis, you're probably going to find that your biggest risk boils down to people. And a lot of times it's, of course, inadvertent, but someone clicking on a link, downloading a file. So, you really need to look at, that's probably going to be your main risk right there, are your folks. So I focus a lot on risk because I think it's the best way to approach all of these frameworks. So when you have a risk, you're going to either avoid it, accept it, reduce it, or transfer it, right? That's what we do in risk management, and apply risk treatments to those risks. So if we look at how to transfer a risk, so what is that? So we all know about insurance, and cybersecurity insurance is certainly out there. Also, cloud service providers. If you have a very complex system and you're really struggling with compliance and trying to build out the system, it might be best for you to go to a cloud. They can handle some of the more complex cybersecurity controls. Not that you don't need to know what those are, because you do, but that would help you build your program. As far as cybersecurity insurance goes, I'm hearing more and more that the thinking is that cybersecurity insurance is going to drive compliance to frameworks. They're already asking, do you do multi-factor authentication? Are you keeping track of your assets? They're asking you questions, just like they do with your personal insurance. Do you smoke? Do you wear a seatbelt? All those kind of things. And so the thought is that insurance is going to drive compliance because you'll get lower rates the more you comply. So that's transferring your risk, but you also can avoid a lot of risk. One is disposing of unnecessary assets, such as old data or any IT hardware that you have hooked up to the network that you might not even know was there. Get rid of it. They're all vulnerabilities, or they increase your risk. If you have old data that is, was supposed to be protected via a regulation, if you still have it long beyond the time that you should have had it, that is an extra risk. So you need to make sure that you're managing your data and getting rid of what you can, or segregating what you can segregate. Minimizing the transfer of sensitive data. I started work in 1982, and it was Martin Marietta before it was Lockheed Martin. We didn't have computers on our desk, and there was no internet. We managed to build intercontinental ballistic missiles with a nuclear warhead on them. So sometimes in this day and age, it's so much easier to push a button and send data to someone. But sometimes we need to think about going back to the way things used to be. If you may need to put something in the mail or FedEx it, and so that you're keeping this data unnecessary out of the network, and you're putting the person that you're sending it to at risk also of not handling that data correctly. So sometimes it's a good thing to go back in time. So one of the things that you need to do in order to, withstand an attack is you've got to reduce your risk, obviously, and you need to select a framework. So one of the ones that I work with, obviously, is NIST, through the NIST 800-171 special publication. There's a CIS framework, there's CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. You need to pick the one that either you're required to use via regulation or that works the best for your organization. And NIST is in my opinion, a very, very good framework to use. I like it because it helps you organize your program. So you know what you need to do. You've got to identify your vulnerabilities, your risks, you've got and what your assets are. You've got to identify all of that. Then you have to protect it. Then how are you going to detect if there is a problem? How are you going to respond? And then how are you going to recover? So to me, this is a really, really good framework to use. So here's an example of risk reduction. So we talked earlier about how people can be, quite the risk for you, and in a lot of cases, the highest risk that you have. So how do you reduce that? Well, you do that with training. And I think that, we tend to forget how important training is sometimes and assume that because this information is kind of out in the public space, that everyone's really aware of phishing and spear phishing and whaling and all the others out there. And they may sort of have a little bit of knowledge about it, but may not understand how it impacts them at work. So training is huge. If you don't do anything else, as a result of this presentation, at least put a training program in place so that everyone in your organization understands cybersecurity risk. And they need to understand how it applies to them and their job, not just that it's out there, but this is how you might see it. And a well-trained workforce is your first line of defense. So I can't stress that enough. I know if there's a lot of small organizations out there, you're thinking, I can't afford a training program and I don't know enough about cyber to train myself. Well, never fear, because there is an excellent one out there that is free. It's Wiser Training. And I love it because it's in short little snippets, a minute or so. And so it will keep your employees engaged and also teach them, what they need to do when presented with one of these threats. So I highly recommend Wiser. It is free. They do have upgradable solutions that you have to pay for, but they are not expensive. And I also have worked it out with those guys that if you tell them you're from North Carolina, you will actually get a discount on that. That's how much I believe in their product. So along with withstanding, an incident, you've got to look at your residual risk. 100% of your risk cannot be eliminated. Did you have a question, Rob?
So we have a question in chat from Laura Rowe. She asked if you can provide the policy number of the NIST framework that you had mentioned.
Okay, it is NIST special publication. So NIST, NIST, SP 800-171. And that will get you to the framework. And they have a lot of information on the site that is very helpful in implementing that framework. And,
thank you, Laura Rowe, and thank you, Laura Rodgers.
You bet. So residual risk, obviously you can never eliminate your risk 100%. And even though you might have everything done perfectly, you still might experience a breach. But there's always going to be some residual risk. So you have reduced your risk, you have transferred your risk, accepted risk, whatever, but there's still this residual risk. And so you have to decide based on the risk appetite that your company has, how much of that you're happy with, that you can deal with. Because trying to go too far with your system can be prohibitively expensive. So you've got to weigh those things. Do I want to accept a little bit of risk, or do I not want to accept any at all? And so those are things that you have to look at. And after you look at your residual risk, if you're not happy with that, you might have to go back through the process again of reducing and avoiding and those things. So risk is hugely important. I mean, that's what this is all about, is reducing your risk. Policies and procedures. I know everybody hates that, and it's not fun. Comprehensive policies and procedures, some people look as a way of kind of binding a company up and making them less agile. And there is a balance there. I know it's difficult, but you will not get repeatable quality results if you do not have a good policy and procedure framework in place. If you have an ad hoc framework, in other words, there's nothing really written down, you're going to create confusion and chaos, and those equal increased risks. So I highly recommend that you get some policies and procedures in place and train your employees on those policies and procedures, test them to make sure they work, and keep revising them as time goes by. As you find things that aren't working that need to be changed, then you can change them. The SANS Institute has really good free templates. I highly recommend those as certainly a starting place, and you can get those at just sans.org, and you can type in the search that you're looking for the policies. But it's a great place to go to get started. I know that writing these policies and procedures it's hard to get started, and so if you have a template to work from, it makes it much easier and goes a lot faster. Okay, so we're still on how withstanding, an incident. And then, so another thing that you have to do to withstand an incident is you have to know how to respond, right? So you have to have detection first. If you can't respond if you don't know an incident has even occurred. So you've got to have controls in place that will let you know that something has happened in your network. You have to have incident analysis to respond effectively. You need to understand How impactful was this? Is it major? Is it minor? Is it something we can deal with in-house? Or if it's ransomware, are we going to need to get the FBI involved? You've got to know, kind of the impact of an incident, and you have to know how to report them. Now, on the NCDIT website, they do have incident reporting, and they can help you with that there. If you're in the Department of Defense, there's a specific way that you have to report them there, and if you need that information, you can reach out to me. And you need to develop the process and procedures again to handle a variety of incidents. And you need to practice those, just like you practice a fire drill or tornado drill or whatever kind of drill. If you don't practice when you actually have an incident, everyone's going to be running around not knowing what to do. And while they're running around not knowing what to do, the impact of that incident could magnify. So instead of stopping it in its tracks, while everyone doesn't know what to do, it's permeating your system. And it might be encrypting your data, all kinds of things. So you really do need to practice incident response. So another thing when you are resilient is you have to adapt, okay? Situational awareness is critical. Again, we're in the exponential age. Information's coming out faster than we can synthesize it. So you have to be intentional about staying on top of situational awareness. You can't adapt if you don't know what's changing. So I recommend CISA. They have a website that shows recent vulnerabilities, threat analysis reports. They have an alert system. I get their alerts, sometimes multiple alerts daily. Chrome needs an update, Adobe needs an update, all the updates, that there have been vulnerabilities have been found there, and you need to update those. So I think that that for me is one of the best ones. And you can also subscribe, to some periodical inside Cybersecurity, CyberWire, something like that, so that you can stay on top of it. And just as an example, just yesterday after I submitted my presentation, I found out about two things that really are new in the situational awareness category. One is that the Department of Justice is going to crack down on federal contractors who don't report major cyber incidents. And there's going to be steep fines involved. So that's new, right? I wasn't expecting that necessarily. And so, you've got to take that information and let it inform how you handle your program. If you're at risk and you don't know that you're supposed to report that, you have an incident, you don't know you're supposed to report it, you could be slapped with a heavy fine. So situational awareness is important there. I also just found out yesterday that the Federal Acquisition Regulation, there is a kind of an interim clause that's probably going to be adopted at the end of the year, which is going to point all federal contractors to adopting the NIST 800-171 framework, meaning you have to be compliant with the 110 controls that are in that framework. So, those are things that, you need to keep in the back of your mind. And how is that going to, how am I going to handle that? How am I going to include those, in my program? How do I, that's going to change my trajectory a little bit, right? So you need to know those. You also need to stay on top of regulations and executive orders, Cyberspace Solarium Commission report, the MITRE ATT&CK framework, things like that. Those are things that can also help you as you develop your program. Implicit in adaptation to, the situational awareness, the new things coming out, is continuous improvement. A lot of times these frameworks that we use for cybersecurity or anything else don't really have continuous improvement in them. So if you recall back a few slides back, we had this exact framework, only it was linear. So how do you turn something linear into continuous improvement? Well, you make it a circle, right? So you're going to be in a continuous loop of identifying threats, identifying assets, protecting those assets, detecting incidents, responding to incidents, recovering from incidents, and doing lessons learned and root cause analysis, then going back around that circle. And that's the only way to have a really effective, resilient cybersecurity program, is to be in this mode all the time. And I think the situational awareness mode that we're in right now, this exponential age, is going to force this, whether you want to do it or not. Yes, we have a question?
Yeah, hey, Laura. Question from Monica Stewart in chat. What websites do you recommend for staying on top of compliance?
Well, as far as situational awareness goes, I look at US CERT. That's out of CISA, and that was, that I had a couple slides back. I get information out of CyberWire, and once you start getting out there, all of a sudden you're on everyone's list. And so I have several things that come through: Fed Scoop, State Scoop, those kind of things. And so, I look at those. I am very active on LinkedIn. So when I find new stuff, I post it on LinkedIn. You are certainly welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I try my best to stay up to date with everyone on what's going on. I have a lot of my clients that follow me on LinkedIn. So there's a lot of stuff out there, and then it becomes a problem, like with me, a fear of missing out, and I'm reading too much. So I would say US CERT, and then, one other publication, CyberWire, Inside Cybersecurity, which is a little bit expensive, or something, like that. You can find, but there's lots of it out there. FedScoop is free also, and so is State Scoop. So another factor in building a resilient cybersecurity program, obviously, is that you can rapidly recover. Again, I'm going to harp on these policies and procedures. It's easier to recover if you have good policies and procedures in place. That makes a big difference. Then everybody knows what to do. You need to know what your assets are, so you know what is lost or impacted as a result of an incident. You need to have multiple backups, with one being offsite and offline. I just heard a story about a company who, they were backing up, but it was connected to the network. They were the victim of ransomware, and so even their backup got encrypted, and they couldn't recover that. So you've got to make sure that when you're looking at your risks, that you take that into account, and you need to have multiple backups, preferably something offsite, and definitely offline. You need to be able to test your backup and restore. It's not going to help you if, when it comes time to recover, and you don't know how to do that, or there's a problem with it. You test it. You always, always, always perform root cause analysis of the incident, and then take what you've learned from that to apply it to your program going forward. Lessons learned meetings, I can't say that enough. Everybody sits in a room, and what did we learn? What went right? What went wrong? And apply those next time. That's critical. So, key takeaways. Building a resilient cybersecurity program is going to take time. There are no quick fixes. There are people out there who will tell you, "Oh, I can get you compliant in 30 days. I suggest you walk away." That is really not true. They may be able to implement the controls, but they have not trained your workforce. They have not, hunted for your assets. They've not located your data. Understood what kind of data you have. Those are things that you have to do yourself. This is a team effort. This isn't something you hike off to your IT staff. This is something everyone in the organization has to be involved with, and they have to understand what's going on. Cybersecurity needs to be foundational. It's just as important as cost, schedule, and performance. The analogy I like is it's like having a baby. So before you have your baby, you're kind of footloose and fancy free. You're making decisions willy-nilly. You get to do whatever you want. Once you have that baby, every single decision you make after that has to take into account the impact on the baby. Well, cybersecurity is your new baby. So every time you make a business decision, anytime you make any type of decision, you've got to look at it from how is that going to impact my cybersecurity status, because it might affect it negatively, and you need to know that. Again, this is a holistic approach. It's not a checklist. It is, and that is what will make you resilient. A checklist of controls does not make you resilient. And this will require a change in your culture, and because you're going to be focusing on continuous improvement. If you've not done that in the past, that is a huge change, but it will make your company better. I guarantee it. And it just may save your organization in the event of an incident. Okay, I think, is that it?
I think we have about 14 minutes for
Okay,
Q&A.
good. Yeah.
I wanted to, offer a few of my own personal questions, but before I do so, I'd like to, again, encourage attendees. If they have any questions, please put them in chat. Don't be afraid. And if you can do so, I'll be happy to, peek back and forth between my questions and those that are in the chat. So, Laura, first of all, with respect to the Colonial Pipeline incident, can you tell me something about resiliency and the role that it played, and how should resiliency play a role in the protection of critical infrastructure and key resources with the context of the lessons learned out of the Colonial Pipeline ransomware incident?
Right. So Colonial Pipeline was, they did not have a resilience system. They didn't have a compliance system even. They were using, I believe, legacy hardware and software that wasn't being patched. They didn't have good password policies. They really hadn't looked at the risk, which is sad when you look at, the fact that they are considered critical infrastructure. So, and they seriously didn't know what to do. And that is something that, it just proves how ridiculous this is, but how we put cybersecurity kind of on the back burner and thought, the IT folks were handling all that stuff, right? So critical infrastructure is really is being put under the microscope right now by the federal government, and lots of requirements coming out in terms of what they need to do to be resilient. Resilience is important not only as a human being, but for all of these critical infrastructures, because we rely on them for our very survival. And so if they're not able to deter a threat, if they're not able to respond quickly and thoroughly to minimize the destruction, if they are not able to bounce back quickly and restore services, then they're putting the entire world at risk here. And so for them to not be doing that already is quite sad. But I think that, one good thing that comes out of SolarWinds and Colonial Pipeline, and all the others that we've had recently is it's brought that to the forefront, and people are understanding the need to have these controls in place and to have a resilient program behind those controls. I don't know if that answered your question.
It certainly did. And thank you for that, Laura. One comment from the chat, Kim Kotler says, Laura, as always, great job of covering the landscape and giving wonderful insights and tips. All the best, Kim Kotler. And I apologize if I mispronounced your last name wrong, Kim.
Oh, thank you. Kim is a good friend and colleague of mine. And back to, I was reading in the chat about compliance websites. If you would go to cybernc.us, that is our website. I've got a lot of information on there about NIST and CMMC. And those are the two biggies in terms of compliance. And I'm also happy to answer, any questions offline. As far as CMMC goes, if you need to stay up to date on those, you need to go to cmmcab.org and sign up for their alerts there. NIST also has sort of an alert function, and anything that comes out, they'll send you emails as well. So if you'd like to reach out to me, I'd be happy to chat with you about those and go over them with you.
Great. Thank you, Laura. You said data is the new currency. That's something that really resonated with me strongly. What are some common challenges public sector agencies tackle in data classification and labeling processes?
Well, that's a really good question. From the DoD, the Department of Defense perspective, the marking of data has been pretty ad hoc in the past. And from a federal government perspective, there hasn't been up till recently any, wide sweeping nomenclature types of regulations. Now there is. Everyone is supposed to mark everything the same way. So if you're looking at controlled unclassified information, it's supposed to be marked the same in the DoD as it is in the DOJ, DHS, EPA, whatever. So that does help, but I had a conversation recently with someone in Washington, D.C. about marking because I was incredibly frustrated. And these things take a lot of time because there's a lot of people in these agencies. It takes a lot of time to filter down. So they're working toward some unified way of marking and getting the information out about the data. Right now, it's a bit sketchy and tough. I look at data as the new currency from the Department of Defense perspective, but you can look at it in any way. Our adversaries, particularly China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, want our data, and they've been wanting it for a very long time, and they've gotten it. They've gotten a lot of it. And so that is worth billions of dollars. And, that's what we're trying to eliminate with particular like a CMMC framework, is eliminate them actually, being able to get this data that we so freely, send around on our networks and house in our organizations. I think it's 70-something% of DoD data resides with contractors, and I would assume that type of percentage could be used probably across the federal government. It's a lot of data in a lot of hands, and that's a lot of vulnerability right there.
I think we have time for one more question. I'm going to take a quick peek in the Q&A, and I don't see any outstanding there, so I'm going to conclude with my final question, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
With the constantly evolving tactics, techniques, and procedures used by malicious actors, what approach would you recommend as public sector agencies embark upon an incident response exercise? How would you approach that if you were a leader in the public sector charged with exercising their IR capabilities?
Well, that is definitely a tough one, and that is certainly where situational awareness is super important. So all we can do at this point is use what we know. Okay, so we have a ransomware exercise, we have phishing exercises, we have insider threat exercises, but the threat landscape obviously changes, and so we would have to stay on top of what the latest threats are, and then sort of orient that to our organization. Are we at risk to that sort of threat? Is that something that might impact us? Again, a kind of a risk analysis. So if it impacts us, are we covered with what we're currently doing, or is this something that needs to be addressed separately? And so a whole new risk analysis, a whole new set of policies and procedures, all new training, and all new testing capabilities. So again, this all gets back to that continuous improvement loop. And, it takes a while for a company that's never quite done that, or an organization, to really get into that loop where everyone in the organization is responsible for continuous improvement. And so as an individual in an organization, I see something, then I let everyone know, and then, okay, now we all need to gather around this new, the latest and greatest threat, and figure out, what to do. So.
Well, Laura, we covered a lot of ground on a very important topic. I cannot thank the North Carolina Military Business Center enough, and I can't thank you enough for spending your valuable and precious and scarce time, like we all are experiencing, and sharing your knowledge and expertise along business resiliency lines. I hope that all attendees really, if you picked up one or two things out of this session, then I'll consider it a success. But you were offered a tremendous amount of valuable information. There was a question in chat about the materials from this session being available, and the resources that Laura, you had mentioned in terms of the website, making those available. There are opportunities to gain those resources by going to the website that Laura had previously mentioned. Laura, if before you jump off, do you mind putting your North Carolina Military Business Center address in chat?
Yes.
For the benefit of our attendees. Please check back to the DIT Symposium website. It was referenced in the meeting invitation to this session for all materials that were presented in this session and others. We'll make those available as soon as we can following the conclusion of our overall symposium.
Yeah.
Laura, again,
thank you. Feel free to contact me anytime. I'm here to help.
Fantastic. Thank you for being a partner in this journey this year, Laura. And we look forward to interacting in the future with you.